Today, we're leaving the church hall and heading down some residential streets to explore small group ministry in homes. For some, the idea of a youth group meeting in a home carries a fear narrative, often tied to complex legal history and shifting government guidance during the COVID pandemic. And of course, concerns about safeguarding. However, we want to explore a counter-narrative today, one that views our homes as helpful, positive, and even holy spaces for ministry. We'll be navigating the practicalities of safeguarding and the logistics of opening up your front door, while also exploring the beautiful theology of the home as a sacred place for spiritual formation and informal relational connection. I'm Melanie Cave, Managing Director at Roots, and today I'm joined by Dr. Sam Richards. She is the head of children's and youth work for the United Reformed Church and brings over 30 years' experience of youth work to the table. Sam was previously the director of the Centre for Youth Ministry and was instrumental in drafting responses to national youth reports, and has a particular passion for intergenerational small groups and the practical how-tos of starting home-based ministries. We're also joined by David Howell, who has been involved in Christian youth work for 50 years. He trained for ministry at Regent's Park College, Oxford, and has been assistant minister at Gorse Hill Baptist Church, Swindon. He was the director of Swindon Youth for Christ for 16 years, and as national director of the Centre for Youth Ministry, he was involved in establishing qualifying courses in Christian youth work with various universities. In addition, he works with Churches Together in England and Churches Together in Britain and Ireland to represent Christian youth work constituencies on various bodies. So we have a wealth of wisdom and experience to handle this topic. Thanks for joining us on the Roots for Churches podcast. Here we go. Welcome, Sam and David, to the Roots for Churches podcast. I'm excited to have you both here to discuss meeting in homes. So before we get started, I wondered if you could share a bit of your personal journey with youth ministry. So I'm going to ask the same question to both of you. When did you feel called to youth ministry? How did that happen? And then how has your involvement in youth ministry evolved? Sam, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so after university, I moved into bedsit, rocked up at my local church on a Sunday morning. On my way, discovered I was the only single person there in their 20s or 30s. And on my way out of church was collared by the curate, who said, "Could you do something with our teenagers?" I'm not suggesting this is good practice. So I went away and thought, yes, I probably could do something with your teenagers. Turned out they had 3. And so I used to invite them back to my bedsit. I spent an afternoon in a Christian bookshop looking at all the resources, because I'd never done any youth work before this. I'd just done things with peers as a young person, a young adult. Picked some Bible study materials. They used to come to my bedsit, quite literally, and sit on my sofa bed and armchairs. And we used to work our way through these Bible studies. I had a friend who went to the local Catholic church and they also had 3 teenagers, and we had the bright idea of putting these 6 teenagers together and actually meeting in a room somewhere, because I couldn't quite fit 6 people into my bedsit. And now, I mean, this was before safeguarding, and we're talking the early 90s here, so that safeguarding hadn't even really been thought of at this point. So there's all sorts of reasons why that's not good practice, what happened, but it was absolutely formative for me as a youth worker.
And how has your youth work evolved from meeting in bedsits to where you are now?
To where I am now. So, I'm now joyfully the parent of a teenager. So, yeah, really tried to encourage them to view our home as somewhere they can invite any of their friends at any time, emergency sleepovers, whatever, that sort of thing, try and be open, really open-handed and open-hearted about the home and as a safe place for teenagers, because I know not all teenagers have that capacity, and having a backstop can be really helpful for people. But in terms of my ministry, I've worked with young people in all sorts of places, Blackbird Leys Estate, in schools. Again, I've had young people around my home loads, had young people come to my wedding, all these kind of joyful things. I now have the privilege of supporting URC Youth Executive, so I get to spend residential weekends with young people, and we always prefer the places that feel like homes. So the very few retreat centres that are still out there are lovely, because they feel much more like homes than conference centres, which feel much more impersonal.
Brilliant. So David, tell us, how did you get called into youth ministry?
I suppose it happened when the church I was in. The natural thing was that you just got involved. It was in the days when we had something like 200 children in the Sunday school in the afternoon. So we had to meet in 2 sessions. So the younger ones met first and then the older ones. And by the time you got into secondary school, you were then expected to go and help with the 5, 6, 7-year-olds. And as my mum was the Sunday school leader, that happened automatically, really. So I suppose that she was part of the calling into that work. And then growing up, the church actually had an open youth club that it ran. And I went along because I was invited along to actually help. So I went along to help. And this was the 14 plus group. Then there was a junior club formed for the 11 to 14s. And one of the junior club leaders was incredibly attractive. So I felt called to help out with the junior club. Things went rather pear-shaped for the adult club because it was that most of your listeners won't understand this at all, but it was what was called the Bonnie and Clyde era. There was a film that was going round, and it was people carrying violin cases and shotguns and things. And there was a group of local lads coming in who were just dressed that way and just were very difficult to manage, and I felt lost. So I sort of felt called out of that because I knew I couldn't cope with it. So have that in mind when I went on didn't go off to university, I went off to college and trained to be a photographer. And at the end of that, felt I ought to give something back to society and was thinking about going overseas, but there was nothing that worked out that way. So I signed up for Time for God, which still exists and is a year out scheme. And so recognizing all my fear of working with aggressive young people and things, they sent me up to Hayward in Lancashire to work with Reverend Mike Huck, who was running a big youth club and also a rock band. And so I went up there for the weekend just to see what it was like. Didn't know who I was going to meet. And in those days, of course, couldn't go online to find out all about it because we didn't have lines apart from ordinary telephone lines. And so I arrived at Manchester Piccadilly and they knew who to expect. And so this little guy came up looking like John Lennon. It wasn't John Lennon. And he said, "Are you David Howell?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Oh, I've come to meet you because there was a stabbing in the club last night and Mike feels he ought to stay there." And I don't know why it was. I just didn't turn around and go back. But I didn't. I carried on. And in fact, it was a life transforming experience up there. It was really great. I mean, Mike literally was lead singer in a rock band. And they ran their own sort of disco area downstairs with all the lights and everything. And that's from where Homegrown Acoustics came, which is that sound company that does a lot of stuff. And it was just amazing. And from there on, I finished that year, went back to home and started working as a photographer. But was involved with some people in the work in Essex with the Baptist churches. And I was asked if I could help lead up with 2 others. And so we did youth weekends in a hotel in Clacton, actually, when Clacton had a much better reputation. That's no offense to people in Clacton, by the way. It was a great time, really good time. And really just carried on from there. Felt called into Baptist ministry. I knew I needed, because my predecessor with Essex had done 5 years, I knew I was going to do 5 years. And I would test it in that time. And I think looking back on it now, I realized that my calling was into ministry, but it was actually into youth ministry in that sense. But I needed the theology. I needed to understand. I needed to have a strong theology of Christ, a strong theology of church. And I recognize that now, looking back. But it was great. And that was, I've never stopped wanting, I just want to be around where young people are. And that's, I'm now sort of grandfather figure for most of them.
Brilliant. I love that about both of you, that your passion for youth ministry has never waned. Like, it's there in the beginning and it's gone all the way through. And for some people, it's like they do children's or youth ministry and then they sort of graduate or they grow up and they go into adult ministry. But I do think there are many people who are called to be youth pastors, youth ministers for their lives. And that passion is there as part of the calling, and it's not something you grow out of. It's not something any age disqualifies you. You don't have to be just 5 years older than young people to work with them. They appreciate all the ages that work with them.
Yes, I was very fortunate. Quite early on in my career, if you like, as a youth minister, I met a couple of people in their 70s and 80s from the States who were over visiting part of Young Life, and that was the first time really I'd met people who who'd stayed in youth work and youth ministry their whole lives, and they were still just utterly brilliant with these unchurched young people that we were working with at the time. And I just thought, yeah, this can be a for life thing, but you need to see some of those role models around, I think.
And I do think academically we're getting better at training people in theology and youth ministry, whereas before it felt like a lot of youth ministry training was maybe on the job, or you just sort of muddled in, or you did a gap year and then you kind of just stayed. Whereas I think, I mean, you've both been part of getting specific training for youth ministry as part of academic curriculum. So can you give me a little reflection on how youth ministry has changed over the years? You know, you hinted at it, Sam, that obviously safeguarding, people did care about children and young people being safe, but we didn't have that terminology, we didn't have language for it. So that's been a big part of this. But are there other things that you think has changed in your time in youth ministry?
Well, the world that young people grow up in, the world that they are the natives of, has changed. I mean, social media didn't exist. The internet didn't exist when I started in youth work. You know, so these are enormous changes in the lives of young people in terms of access to information, and then obviously we've had the COVID period, the kind of increase in mental health issues, and awareness of neurodiversity, and all these sorts of things, and gender and sexual diversity and stuff. So I think the world has changed enormously, and the experience of young people and what they need of the people who, for me, being a youth worker is the privilege of accompanying young people on their journey. And sometimes it's for a very little bit, you know, a day or a weekend or something. And sometimes it's for years, you know, and you get to see them grow up and have children and, you know, all those sorts of things. It's that desire to be with them on their journey rather than make their journey a particular thing or fit your sense of what a journey should be. Yeah. And I mean, I would say the great bonus of being involved in youth work is it keeps you young, because it keeps you connected with what's really going on in the world for young people.
Yes, I agree with Sam on that. It has changed phenomenally. What hasn't changed is the fundamental questions that young people still ask. Who am I? What am I here for? What's life about? Is there more to life than what I'm going through? So that hasn't changed, but where they seek the answers has changed. Absolutely phenomenal. And I think too that there's been quite a big change sociologically, or in terms of what society and communities do. Because when I was growing up, I also got quite involved in the local youth club as well as I was growing up, and represented young people at the Havering Council and stuff when I was a young person. But so much of youth clubs have disappeared. Just austerity just collapsed the whole thing within the English setting, not in quite the same way within the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish settings. But it now means that Christian youth work is seen around as being the biggest provider of youth work. And so much Christian youth work actually is a lot now is geared around those who actually come to the church as sort of members or children of. Whereas I think that there's so much challenge we ought to be taking up in terms of providing open youth access, providing those spaces where they can ask the big questions and where they can, in time, discover who we are and what the nature of the faith is that we adhere to, not that you put it out up front to start with. So I think that's the big thing. The other thing too was I remember a speaker at one of the Youth Scope lectures back in 2023 saying that research has shown that young people in the 3 years since before COVID until 2023 had spent 50% less time out of the house than they did before. And yet, so young people's venue of choice, in a sense, for communication is their bedroom. And that's where they call the contacts and things. And that's what we have to be working around and thinking through and seeing, well, how do we make faith real and engaging? How do we support young people? And I love the journey with Sam. And I think we've been privileged too, because I think language has changed within the Christian community. Conversion used to be seen as a single one-off event through the whole time, things like the Billy Graham Crusades in the 50s. Yes, I know that dates me even further. And I was in the Billy Graham choir when he was in Earl's Court in 1966. But the fact is that it's just such an important thing to be with young people and to journey with them. And so many people these days rightly talk about the journey of faith, because we haven't arrived. It is a journey, and we learn and we grow. And the idea of journeying together, I think, is hugely important.
So I think one of the things that I'd like to move us on to is how government has got involved in youth work. My recollection, and I have not been at it quite as long as you guys, but that churches kind of got on with it and tried to operate under best practice and good principles, but there wasn't a lot of government regulation around youth groups. But that seemed to increase in the last years, and particularly during the COVID pandemic. So could you set the scene for us, recap some of the history of government guidance regarding meeting in homes and other things towards youth groups? Specifically, tell us about what was going on pre-COVID and then what happened during COVID.
Right. I think at the same time, we've also got to hold the issues around the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse and all of the wrong things that have been happening. So that's one thing we'll come back to. Youth work has always been able to happen in homes, and certainly in churches it always has, right from the time of Christ and before, right from the time of the beginnings.
We have Eutychus falling out of a window when Paul's preaching. So that's a young person in a home. Yeah, so we've got biblical evidence for it.
Yes.
And hurting himself, which is a classic youth work problem.
Yes, indeed.
And so what happened was that the government were committed to youth work in the pre-COVID years. We sort of go right from the others onwards. There was a commitment to working with young people. There were funds that were available through local authorities to set up youth work. And a lot of youth work took place, huge amount, really good youth work. And then austerity kicked in and the youth work situation in England just crumbled. And there was huge amounts of money didn't go to local authorities any longer. Plus they still had to pay for education. They still had to pay for social services, which are the two biggest expenditures of local authorities. And so all their youth activities disappeared. And then we get to COVID and 2020. And what happens then is everybody has to stay at home. We all had to. I think we were allowed out for 20 minutes, was it, each day at one point?
Yeah, if you're lucky. For a walk around the block.
That's it, yes. Only keep one away from anyone else walking around the block. And so it was illegal to meet in homes, even with relatives and friends for a period. And then the regulations changed, and then they eased, and then they tightened up again. And through this time, there was a body that was supported by government. It's not technically a government body. I think it's more like a quango, called the National Youth Agency, which operates in England. And they were brilliant at creating guidelines on what you could and couldn't do once the regulations started easing. But there was a time when you still couldn't meet in homes, although you could work outside. You could meet young people outside, which was excellent and provided really good youth work for them. And so they said, it's illegal to meet in homes. As things changed, and as then it became possible for you to meet in homes, and as at times when it seemed like we were ending that and we were able to carry on, they kept the phrase in their documentation that youth work must not happen in homes. We then challenged that, and myself and another met up with Lee Middleton, who is still the director of the National Youth Agency, and said, you can't say this any longer because legally it's not right. You can actually meet in homes. You can have meetings in homes. But he then insisted that as far as the MIA were concerned, it was such a dangerous possibility. And because the independent inquiry into child sex abuse was starting to produce reports about some of the wrong things that had happened that should never have happened, but were happening, particularly sadly amongst the Christian community of all places, a community that honors every person as being made in the image of God. So that was the battle that we had. The National Youth Agency then did some research and ran a consultation, and their research came out in a document, and it said in their introduction, it said that there was this sense that youth work in homes was fundamentally unsafe. And that was the phrase that spooked the whole Christian youth work community. And I then, when that report came out, I then got back to one of the staff there and said, can we see this research? Because I'd been through all of the reports that were out by that time from the independent inquiry, and at no place was there any recommendation that work should not happen in a home. At no place was there records like this. But I was never allowed to see that research. So we're never allowed to, as it were, reflect on it, see what was true.
Evaluate the evidence. Yeah.
Yes.
So that you've just got their conclusions, but not the actual reports.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the report it goes on to basically to say, well, if you must do it in a home, here are the things you need to put in place and think about to make it safe. So, because this headline is fundamentally unsafe, and basically they don't want to see youth work happening in homes. They don't think it should be happening in homes. And I think it's part of a much wider discussion between the voluntary sector and particularly the faith sector and the National Youth Agency about what is youth work and is youth ministry youth work or not.
How would you define them as different things? Because we use the terms interchangeably.
Yes, and I think the National Youth Agency would quite like to establish a bit of clear water between them. But the Christian sector wants to say, no, we're working with young people. We abide by the core principles of youth work, of empowerment, participation, informal education and equality of opportunities. These are fundamental to good work with people, and particularly good work with young people. And so we promote those same core principles, and we would see them all as being fundamentally rooted in our understanding of God and how God wants to relate to people as well. So certainly not in any way in conflict with Christianity. But I think it's the fact that to me, it's around the understanding of boundaries and professionalism. And in the Christian community, our goal isn't youth work. Youth work is part of building a Christian building a community of faith. Whereas in the secular world, youth work is youth work and then has some kind of relationship to civic society. But it's all much more professionally bounded. So when I lived on an estate in Oxford, and I was both working for the local council youth club and doing Christian youth ministry, the council weren't keen on the fact that I lived on the estate where the youth club was. Whereas to me, that was really important that I lived on the estate where the council youth club was. Because for them, it wasn't, there was a danger that I would know some of these young people in other settings, in other ways. I'd catch the same buses. Do you know what I mean? Whereas to me, that was the kind of point. Was I'm about trying to live life with these young people. So I think it's that they see that as kind of muddied, messy, difficult to regulate. And they're right. Christian community is complex. We have these multi-layered relationships. You're both somebody's youth worker and their auntie, or best friends with their mum, or do you know what I mean? Or your oldest babysits for them. There's all these kind of messiness that goes on. Or their parent is your minister, or your boss, or we have all these really complex, multi-layered relationships. But because we're trying to be a community, that's kind of the point.
Yeah, and sort of separating it out and professionalizing it, you almost become like a therapist or a doctor or a social worker. You're along those lines of you're this trusted adult, but you are following a protocol, whereas social situations blur those boundaries. But I think that, as you say, that is the nature of church. And I think we talk about whole life discipleship. The benefit of having those blurred lines is that there's more accountability, there's more opportunity for seeing how a life could be modelled. I suppose the safeguarding question is there's more opportunity for those relationships to be taken advantage of.
Absolutely. So it's really important that safeguarding is a whole church process, that that we're told that there's that accountability and transparency and those kind of things are a lived part of the community, which means we have to be able to admit when we get things wrong. And the Christian community ought to be absolutely the place where we can do that, where there's forgiveness, where there's understanding, and where appropriate things can be put in place to stop that happening, things happening again. And if we need, the Christian community needs to be a place that is lived in the light, as absolutely as much as possible. And I think there's a misunderstanding about professionalism. The oldest profession actually is ministry, because the word profession is about making a profession of faith and a covenant relationship, those professing something and those to whom they will be serving, that you get some privileges as the professional precisely because you've made this contract of trust. We understand that with doctors, we can understand that with lawyers, we can understand that with church ministers. Do you see what I mean? And this in a church community, that ought to be true of anyone in any voluntary role, that there's so that's what we mean by professional, and that relationship needs to be open to scrutiny and trust. So we need to be able to hold to account when they don't act in the best interests of the people they're supposed to be defending, or whatever it might be, or doctors if they don't act in the best interests of their patients, etc. And so we ought to be able to do the same. So I think it's understanding what we mean by professional, and I think it's about having I talk about a kind of moral gyroscope that actually rather than knowing the rules and operating within fixed professional boundaries, what's much more helpful is if people have a sense of what are good relationships, how am I understanding the power dynamics here, and ensuring that they're not facilitating abuse and harm in any way, shape or form. And that means being able to see and adjust and flex to the circumstances that you find yourself in. So my classic example would be, safeguarding wise, I shouldn't as an adult be on my own in a car with an under 18. Yep, it's very clear boundary. However, there are some times when, in my professional opinion, it is more unsafe for that young person for me to not put them in my car on my own than it is for that situation to happen. But I just need to make sure I've let somebody know, their parents know, whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? That this is happening. We all know that I'm flexing the rules, but I'm making a judgment, a professional judgment, that this is the right thing to do on this occasion. But I'm not saying therefore we can do this on any occasion. Whatever. Everybody knows. Just do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
We have that transparency and accountancy, and we look at how do we end up in a situation where, rather than abandon a young person at a railway station to get in a taxi on their own, it was better that I, as a DBS checked, trusted adult, went and picked them up in my car. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. And it's where the policy it's living by policy doesn't always work.
Yeah.
The policy is there to help us have good practice.
Yes.
But not every situation is accounted for in these policies. And the point of them is to point us towards the values that are underneath them. And we want to operate out of the best. But yeah, we don't throw away the policies.
No,
definitely.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So
I had a very real experience of that when I was running a midweek home group for the young people from the local parish church. And it was in someone's home, not my home. Myself and another youth worker would turn up for it, and we were there. The doors are always, it's someone's home, they can always come in, and there was always one of their adults there as well. And then the vicar's son wanted to come along, but he was, I think, 14 at the time. He was too far from the home to feel that they could walk safely that way. So, and I'd known the vicar for some years, and so he said to me, "Could you take him?" And so I said, well, only if we have a clear agreement together that firstly he sits in the back and I'll be in the front. There'll be no one else, but you'll know when he leaves. And then when he gets there, he has to text to say he's there. Okay. Just before he leaves, he texts to say he's leaving and then drive back. So that was covered in that way. And that wasn't meeting the recommendations about safeguarding, because actually legal safeguarding is a much tighter thing. It doesn't include a lot of the recommendations that we as churches think are very important. And so it's important to recognise that. But again, I held myself accountable all the way through to them. And you always make sure the door gets open before you leave a young person at their house to, they get in safely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all of these things where it's being carriers of trust, isn't it? As you say.
Yeah.
It's like these parents trust us, these young people trust us. What can we do to make sure that trust is never abused and that we're above and beyond, but also that it's practical? Like sometimes the requirements feel so restrictive that you're like, well, can we do anything? And so let's come back to this idea.
Safeguarding is there to enable
Yeah.
good practice to happen. It's not there to prevent good practice. It's there to enable good practice, and we have to remember that. But we also, as David was saying, we also have to remember that terrible things have happened.
Yes.
Oh dear.
people have been horribly hurt and abused inexcusably, and we mustn't be blind or naive to that.
And yes, and I suppose sometimes you have people getting into youth ministry who are young and inexperienced and have not maybe had the professional training as such. And so there can be the challenge of like they're hardly out of youth themselves and they're now in these leadership roles. And so helping them to see that they have to operate in a different way than they would with their mates, or how they would just casually walk somewhere or give someone a lift, that those rules are different. And so that's why I think in youth work particularly, the policies are so hot on it, because there can be quite a lot of turnover, there can be a lot of young leaders, and you're trying to say, look, this is why we're setting these policies in churches, because we want to be above reproach, we want to keep everyone safe.
Yeah.
Can you help us challenge this fear narrative around homes? Because, as you say, I think we're all very aware of the sexual abuse scandals, of what's going on. I feel like there's not a month when the media doesn't bring out a new report about something like that. And I'm really glad that the church is talking about it, taking it seriously. But it does create this fear narrative that something bad will happen, and therefore we should just be as safe as possible, and therefore homes, as the report says, homes are fundamentally unsafe, or are they? So can we challenge this fear narrative to see homes as helpful, positive, holy spaces? Can you sell it to us and help us combat that fear narrative?
Certainly. That's at least some of the sort of spiritual and theological things to Sam, because she has specialised a bit in the theology of space. But legally, it is not illegal to have youth work take place in homes. It happens. And there's no legislation in place that says it must not happen. It is simply guidance that has come out from the National Youth Agency in the light of their own understanding of it, and in the light of their own understanding of youth work, about how youth work is a very separate activity from any relationship with parents or carers and homes and things like that. So it's seen in that sense. But for us in the Christian community, so youth work should be taking place in homes. It should be happening in homes between parents and children. It's what Deuteronomy 6 talks about, about sharing the faith together, about living it together. And in fact, young people's, their prime understanding of faith and how it works out comes from parents and how we demonstrate that. So it is actually important, and it's important because also, remember the Sticky Faith research that came out, and the fact that young people on average needed 5 trusted adults who were able to share in different ways the faith as part of their journey into faith. And of course, 5 is far more than you have in a normal home. I mean, it's others. So it's not illegal. And actually, it is sociologically, it's the best place to be. It's the place where young people feel safest. They feel at home. They feel they can be honest there because of the environment. But Sam, this has been your speciality, particularly.
Well, I think homes are informal, relaxed and personal, which can be a complete contrast to church, often for many people. And so they invite people to behave differently, to be more informal, to be more relaxed, to be more personal, which changes the types of interactions that happen in that space. And it's the same reasons that make homes a risk, that make homes a beautiful space, because there's just the messiness of life in a home. However much you tidy up, there's evidence of who you are, how you spend your time, what you like, where you go on holiday. Any of those kind of things are just there. So there's a sense of exposing who you really are. And if young people want anything from adults, they want integrity.
Yeah.
They have an absolute integrity detecting radar. And which is why, if there's a point of your life that's sore, they will find it and prod it. Do you know what I mean? If there's a place where you're not comfortable about something in your life, young people have an unerring ability to kind of detect that and prod it. And that's part of their gift, part of their this kind of prophetic insight, part of their gift.
And they call it banter.
Yes.
Even if it feels a bit ouchier than banter.
Yep. And because you're that the person whose home it is revealing a little bit more of themselves, that kind of invites everybody else to do that too, which means we deepen the level of connection and relationship. And ultimately, for faith to grow, Jesus meets us where 2 or 3 of us gather together. That's what he's promised. And so the deeper that connection between the 2 or 3 or more, the deeper the place we're inviting Christ into in our relationships and also in our lives. And also, I think really importantly, it shows that homes are so far from the kind of performance aspect of church life. Meeting in a home, praying in a home with somebody, worshipping in a home with somebody, looking at the Bible in a home with somebody says, this is home, this is whole of life activity. It's not something we do in the special place with the special people. You know, and as a child, you know, church to me had a special smell and we used words that we didn't use anywhere else. You know, there was all that stuff I kind of absorbed about the specialness of God. But doing things in homes also says, no, it's gritty, it's real, it's connected to everyday life. And that's really, really important. Yeah. Yes. So I think it invites a different level of vulnerability, which is why it can be a problem. Do you know what I mean? So we need to be super alert to that. We also need to be alert to really practical things like the kind of risk assessment you would do of your church building. You basically need to do that of your home, which means looking at your home through very different eyes and thinking, oh, there's quite a lot of sharp objects that are accessible. How would people get out in an emergency? Well, maybe I should move all the wellies from in front of the back door, because although one person could get out, could 10 of us get out quickly? Do you know what I mean? Is that, you know, that kind of thing. So you have to think those whole range of health and safety things through. And in terms of safeguarding, there are private spaces, and we know that unseen spaces where people can be with children and young people and vulnerable adults is problematic, and homes are full of these. So you just have to set clear expectations about bedrooms being out of bounds, about which toilets it's okay for people to use, about who takes, if we're thinking intergenerationally, who takes children to the toilet. You know, these kind of things. Who's allowed in the kitchen? You know, what's appropriate. Yeah, and if you're preparing food and things, you need to think about, you know, cleanliness and hygiene and all those kind of things in a level beyond what you would do for your normal household. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's also something about hospitality, and Jesus accepted an enormous amount of hospitality in his life. He was by far more often a guest than a host, and he encourages people to see hospitality as a description of the kingdom. You know, the heavenly banquet, the who are you inviting for meals in your home? You know, these are the kind of questions Jesus asks us, and it's not just the people we're necessarily most comfortable inviting, or who we think will invite us back. You see, and so youth ministry, immediately we're not necessarily expecting these young people to invite us back into their homes. It's very much a gift of hospitality. Henri Nouwen talks about hospitality a lot in terms of making space for somebody else, truly making space. And I think, you know, when you tidy up your home and whatever, there's a kind of prayerful space making for people to come and be in this space and encounter you, and together encounter God, I think. And it opens up the possibility of, you know, in some settings, you know, youth groups rotate around the young people's homes. I mean, that might be a bit middle class, but and so those people take it in turns to host and enjoy the group coming to their house. Yeah. There's probably other things I could say.
There's a lovely bit in one of the Psalms, Psalm 68, verses 5 and 6, and from the Easy English Bible it reads, "God is a father for those who have no father. He takes care of the widows. He rules from his holy home. God gives homes and a family to lonely people." And that sense of the importance and the value of home, it just comes all the way through Scripture, doesn't it? And the early church started in homes. And even today, homes are a significant part of what it means to be the people of God together and be the honest people, the down-to-earth, real people that sometimes, these days, we don't dress in our Sunday best, but we wear our Sunday best attitudes and things, or can do in church. Whereas in home, that's where you real honesty about the tough stuff as well, and facing that and living with that.
Of that God's opening his home to us and rules from his home. And I think it feels funny to have National Youth Agency making advice about how we can do hospitality, which is such a cultural experience as well, and a spiritual discipline of hospitality, as you were saying, Sam. So, yeah, to allow the young people to offer hospitality to offer it ourselves and allow people into our homes. It feels very important. So how safeguarding peace just doesn't go away.
Mhm.
How can, whether you're a church leader listening to this or a youth leader going, I'm going to have to convince our safeguarding officer or a church leader that this is a good idea, what can we do to make sure that everyone is protected and supported? Is there special assessments or policies that you think we should put in place that will make this safer? Because again, we want to be able to do it, but we want to do it the best way we possibly can.
By and large, you want to apply your safeguarding principles to the home. So you want to make sure that your leaders have been safely recruited and appropriately checked. I would say they shouldn't both live at the venue, the home. You should always have more than one leader, and they shouldn't both live in that space. So if I think back to my experience, as a 21-year-old straight out of uni, on my own in a bedsit with young people coming round, that no longer would pass muster. Quite. But in those days, you couldn't have DBS'd anybody. That system didn't exist. Do you know what I mean? We're just in a different world. Everybody needs to know where and when you're meeting. So parents of under 18s need to know where, just as they would if it was something at the church. Do you know what I mean? That information needs to be public and available. Everybody needs to know what to do if they have any concerns about safeguarding. So in a church, you've got your safeguarding poster on the wall with who to contact. So you just need an equivalent knowledge available to everybody. And then you risk assess the activities and the space as you do for anything else.
And as you say, the transport there and back, or all of the sort of, sometimes it's in the in-betweens, isn't it? It's the activity itself is fine, but as you say, it's like, how are people getting there? Who's hanging around? Who's the last one to leave?
Yeah.
And it's those awkward transition moments that are where people can be vulnerable. So
Yes.
attending to those in our thinking.
And I think an extra dimension with homes is obviously because it's in your home or in somebody's home, everybody then knows where that person lives. And for young people, that may feel like a safe place that they could go at other times. So it's then being clear about those expectations. Is that okay or is that not okay? Do you know what to do if a young person knocks on your door at 10 o'clock at night in tears on a non-youth group night? So talking through potential scenarios, which are the sorts of things that ministers would have thought about, because where a minister lives is often quite a public thing. They live in a place called the vicarage or the manse.
So that people can find them in an emergency.
Exactly. And what a good choice by a young person to go to the home of their youth leader if there's an emergency.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing. It's just being prepared and knowing how to respond in a way that keeps everybody safe. And then it's back to these principles of transparency and accountability. So I think one of the things our churches are often not very good at is the accountability bit, that there isn't regular, good, reflective supervision spaces for volunteers engaging with young people where people can be honest and say, oh, I made a decision to do this, and everyone else can go, oh, I don't think that was the right decision, rather than, because otherwise we just self-affirm in those times when we flexed the rules in order to deal with a situation. We tend to think our judgment is good, and we need the critical feedback and reflection of other people around that. And I think also, I think back to when I was part of a team of youth workers at Oxford Youth Works, and I can remember one of our peer supervision sessions, a couple of us saying one of the young people was actually incredibly attractive. And as just being able to confess that to one another meant that we all knew nothing was going to happen, because we'd all been able to be honest about the fact that this young person was incredibly attractive.
And by outing it, it then allows accountability.
Exactly.
And people say, you're not doing anything about that then.
It puts it in the light. Yeah. But we had a safe space where that could be confessed, if you like. And as I say, for that, and then it's like you've burst the balloon of temptation or whatever by having that safe space. So I think that's something our churches could really improve on. And so for any home group leaders or whatever, that whole hosting in your home, having a space where people can reflect critically, prayerfully together on how well they are doing it and how could they do things better, and learn from each other's experience and things. I think that would be positive.
Yeah, and so don't, in your gatherings of small group leaders or youth leaders, don't just spend all the time on the content or what we're trying to communicate with the young people or through the small groups, there is the space for and how are we doing it? And that reflection.
Yeah. And talk about how difficult you find it not to be upset that your favourite mug got smashed because somebody was careless, or that your carpet now has these stains on it that you can't get rid of. Do you know what I mean? Or whatever. Because this is the reality of hosting in your home. Yeah. And again, places to talk, to talk that through with others, prayerfully and honestly, helps resentment not build up, and, confessing our sins to one another is what we're called to do.
So we've primarily talked about youth groups in homes, but you hinted at this earlier. There's a growing move towards intergenerational meeting in homes. And David, you raised the Sticky Faith research, which was about 5 key adults in young people's lives, and it often helped if one of them, if they were not the professional paid church leader or youth worker, because that authenticity of ordinary, normal people going about their lives following Jesus, that gave people, young people, something to model, that the only way to follow Jesus was not to become a professional Christian, as it were. So we've got these intergenerational spaces. We've got groups potentially meeting homes across the ages. What does that do to this conversation? Do you want to speak to that of does that add extra challenge? Does that help us with our safeguarding or make it harder?
I think it can do both. I think it can help us in that there are more adults around rather than just a couple of leaders and greatly outnumbered by young people. So that can be helpful. I think you're trying to grow trust between people. So you want to have a sense that everybody there is trustworthy, because inevitably, as if you're a parent there, your child starts to build a friendship with another adult, which is what you want. But you need to feel that this person is a trustworthy person. And I think you can only move things at the pace of trust. So you can't kind of force those kind of things. I think you do have, in terms of health and safety and stuff, if you've got very small people or frail people or people with mobility issues, these kind of things, that you might be more likely to have an intergenerational group, you obviously need to think about the appropriateness of the space and how you can adapt the space that you've got. You may need more than one space. And as soon as you're in more than one space, the question then is, who is supervising in the space that you are not in as the leader, particularly if, some people want to spend a lot longer on one thing and other people just need to go off and chill for a bit, something like that. You need to shift the sense of who's in charge to this is everybody's group, everybody's responsibility, those kind of things. And I think that takes time to embed and needs a bit of talking through and thinking through and again, reflecting on, as well as, what was the best thing about the time we spent together, what could we do better next time for everybody to feel safe. I think the huge advantage is if we get that right, if we manage to create spaces where everybody feels safe and everybody knows that their voice will be heard. If they know that their voice will be heard around what sort of biscuits you have, or what songs you sing, or do you know what I mean? That they're one of the voices that are being heard around, they're trivial things, then they're much more likely to believe that their voice will be heard around, actually, that makes me feel really uncomfortable, or when this person does this, I really don't like it. And that's what ultimately, that's what will provide safeguarding in our churches, is when everybody feels able to voice, know that they will be heard and responded to helpfully around anything that feels unsafe for them.
I think it's interesting, in a gathered church setting, there's clear hierarchy or leadership. There's somebody wearing a dog collar, there's somebody in robes, there's somebody at the front with a microphone, however your church distinguishes that leadership role. So you think whatever this person says, they're setting the parameters, setting the boundaries. In a home, it can feel much blurrier. There might be one person hosting, one person leading. There might be a church leader who's there, but it isn't either the host or the leader of that group. There might be people who are more vocal, and it flattens things out in a very helpful way in a lot of spaces, that it's great for people being known and being able to be authentic and real, but it does make it a little bit less clear where the authority lies, who's in charge, who do I complain to, who's going to listen. And so I do think in those intergenerational settings, being quite upfront, if you can, and say, this is how we're organised, this is how you feedback, here's the person, If you're unsure about something, how something works, or you don't like how something is, here are all the people that you can talk to, and this is what we'll do, so that people know, because it's not clear visually, as it were, when you walk in and you sit in a row and look at the person at the front who's in charge. Homes are more complicated, aren't they? But I think in a really good way that provokes our discipleship. So if people are still mulling this over, what can they do? How can they find out more? Have you got some resources you want to point us to?
Have indeed. Sam, and myself and others have been busy really for the last 3 years actually working on this. And so for the National Youth Ministry Weekend in 2023, in November, we produced a document which was appropriately called Keeping Young People Safe in Private Dwellings, and arguing for all the things that you need to put in place, and the appropriate thinking and the theological understanding. And then from that, we then were able to sort of put it together into a Grove booklet. Homegrown Youth Work is what it's called. And it's a collaborative document. It's been worked on by a whole number of different organisations. Sam's been part of that, and the others are listed in there. And we've come together across the churches in order to say that here's what good theology looks like, what good practice looks like, what good youth work, which becomes youth ministry, looks like, and what good safeguarding looks like. And so that's where we can hopefully direct people to. It's a Grove booklet, which means it's just under £5, and in 28 pages you get as much as you're going to need. But at least starting, but more than anything, just picking up on the things, particularly from today, just that whole thing again about accountability that Sam was saying, and the need for good reflective practice, thinking carefully about what we've been doing, how it's been working, what we can learn from others about what we can learn from other people involved in this, and then also the self-understanding and the importance of a group being able to say, yes, that young person is very attractive, but saying it in the group and recognizing that, if you like, you've stated the risk, and part of the risk management is that you've all owned up to it, as it were, and you've all recognized it. And therefore you can all hold each other accountable. At any point, you can say, do you remember when we said that? Yeah. And still sticking with that, because it's tough in terms of keeping the if you like, the moral compass that we were talking about, that sense of and that's the other thing, growing in our own faith, growing in our own understanding of who we are and who God calls us to be, and also asking forgiveness for sins and involving other people. Taking the risk of other people knowing about that is hugely important, and it's absolutely vital. So yes, so Homegrown Youth Work. The other book is still available. It's on Churches Together in England website, and it's a lot of the denominations now have. I know Sam's worked with the URC Church, and there's a document particularly about this. The same with Caroline Edwards with the Church of England, Meg Prouting with Methodists, and yes, the denominations being committed. I mean, the person who first came with me to meet Lee Middleton to start this whole process was Mary Hawes. We were on Zoom together in that sense, but
because it was COVID.
Yes, and at the time she was director of the work in the Church of England regarding youth work. So there's a lot of commitment from all over to this whole area and wanting to help people.
And yes, and I think my sort of final point would be meeting in homes provides greater opportunity for us to learn and grow with the children, the young people, the adults, whoever it is we're inviting into our homes. It's a more, that leveling you were talking about isn't just about power dynamics. It's also about, it facilitates co-discipleship. And it means that we're giving and receiving, not just providing, it's not just a provider consumer model anymore. And that's really, really important in the faith community.
Brilliant. Thank you both for your wisdom and for your work. I know it's no small things to pull together these reports, to go back to the National Youth Agency, to engage with government. And it is often It sounds glamorous, but it's probably not very glamorous. It's probably boring meetings that go on quite a long time. So I thank you for how you've served the churches and served so many youth ministers by doing the thinking and doing the campaigning. And it is really important that we think these things through and not come under fear. Do it well, but also do what really works and what aligns with our values, which is this life-to-life discipleship that can happen in homes. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sam Richards has written a couple of articles for Roots about youth groups meeting in homes and also how to run an intergenerational small group. You might also want to pick up the Grove booklet David edited, Homegrown Youth Work. Roots supports your youth and intergenerational ministry with weekly and seasonal outlines to help you lead engaging and relational small groups. Our weekly content could be used in a youth group or in a small group setting, and we provide an additional Bible study that can be used for home-based Bible studies. Roots exists to help you lead great church that's growing, relevant, engaging, authentic, and together. We provide weekly resources to support preaching, worship leading, intergenerational ministry, Bible study, outreach, and children's and youth sessions to over 11,000 subscribers. Our content follows the revised Common Lectionaries pattern of reading through Scripture over 3 years, offering common worship variations for the Church of England when the readings differ. Head to rootsforchurches.com to take a free trial and explore our wealth of resource. You can try a digital subscription or add on our stunning full-colour magazines that help you prepare and share offline. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share it with leaders in your church and network, and leave us a review as that helps others find it. Together, we can grow.